Welcome back to another episode of Light Beer Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble.
And I am your humble host, Chris Clements.
And today is, it's Thursday,
The 23rd.
June 23rd. It is Clarence Thomas's birthday.
Wow.
And that's significant for me because Clarence Thomas gave a speech for the Goldwater Institute a number of years ago. And he talked about his road to Damascus. That is, what was his awakening, understanding that he was a conservative. And it was a process because he was raised by his grandfather, who was, taught him a lot about self-reliance and, pulling yourself up, by the bootstraps and, creating your own future. And for me, my road to Damascus in getting deeply involved, to really make the decision to get deeply involved in politics and into this crazy business, was the Supreme Court hearings in the Judiciary Committee that Joe Biden chaired back when he was a nominee in 1990. I was going to say 2, but it was probably 91.
91. It was that fall, 91.
Yeah. And
yeah, it was
that
something
was,
else.
I was a freshman in college because I had gone on my church mission. So I was a little bit older than most freshmen, but I skipped a couple weeks of classes and was glued to these hearings. And it was transformational for me because I just couldn't believe how unfairly he was being treated through that process. And he has been a remarkable justice, and one that is, in this day and age, I think he's very underrated.
Oh,
and he's
and misunderstood.
mocked and misunderstood. The left has always hated him.
Well,
They've always hated the idea of a conservative African-American man,
Oh, well, we can rant about that the whole time. I mean, the left does not like the idea of not just a conservative African-American, but a conservative Hispanic, a conservative Asian. They believe that any person of color or any sort of any person that doesn't fit their narrative about what you should believe if you're African American or Hispanic or whatever. I mean, look what they've done with language, with calling Hispanics Latinx, which nobody. I mean, even our good liberal friend Congressman here,
Ruben Gallego.
Ruben Gallego.
Say, to his credit, he's like, we don't do that in my
Ruben
office.
is like, that
crazy.
Doesn't exist, and please stop.
Yeah.
And that is something that's made up by somebody in a think tank up in New York or Washington, D.C. Please stop. And so, I mean, if you don't fit that narrative, and certainly what Clarence Thomas was a threat to that narrative.
Yeah.
And that and we're seeing it now in electoral politics, and we're seeing it with the rise of groups like Blexit and other conservative African American conservative base think tanks and groups, and it's a threat.
Yeah.
And I think it began with people like Clarence Thomas, and it just has accelerated. You have somebody like Tim Scott, who's up for re-election. You've had other stalwart conservatives within the Republican Party, and they've been treated the same way.
Yeah. Well, and interestingly, so if you look at, in Congress, Will Hurd was the only African American. Actually, no, we have 2, because we have the guy from Florida.
Oh,
so he's the only African American member of Congress now, because Will Hurd retired.
Okay.
But we have Walt Blackman, who's running
Blackman
in the rural district, and so that primary is coming up. We have Tanya Contreras-Wheelis in the Stanton district. So there's 2 minorities who would replace white guys. We have Juan Ciscomani, who's running in the Tucson area, would replace Ann Kirkpatrick.
Yeah.
So we could go, our delegation could become extremely more diverse than it has been.
Yeah, we've had Tanya on the show. We're hoping to have Juan on, but I mean, she has said it very plainly that she's a threat to the narrative
Yeah.
of the Hispanic narrative of being a liberal Democrat
Right.
and being subservient to the state. And you need the government to decide for yourself, your family, and your community.
And that
what-
is
what's right or wrong.
And that narrative is changing dramatically over the last few years. As you look at what happened in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, we had Mary Flores get elected in a special election last week in a district. Check this out: in a district that Obama carried by 60 points.
Yeah.
That
It's
Clinton
like 80%.
carried.
It's 80% Hispanic.
Yeah,
right?
or more.
Yeah.
Clinton carried it by who knows what, and Biden barely. Or maybe, yeah, he won the district, but just barely. So they've had this decline of support amongst Hispanics
Oh,
all across the country.
and that decline has been accelerating, due to several factors, and what we've talked about on the show, and social issues that the left is pushing don't jive well with the Hispanic family structure being what it is, and the immigration issue, which is porous, if not completely broken.
Well, yeah, and I think
and is affecting those border communities. So those border communities. So I would assume people are sitting around the dinner table and looking at their current circumstances, saying, "Why are we voting for these people? All we get down here is chaos."
right. And it's interesting when I talk to liberals, friends of mine who are liberal, who live in eastern states
Mm.
or the Midwest, somewhere that's not Arizona
Or impacted by
Texas,
these
or
issues, of
California.
course.
They're just so shocked when they look at polling and they'd say, well, Hispanics are all pro-immigration. And I said, well, they might be pro-immigration in the sense of but they're not pro-illegal immigration.
No.
Because there's so many of our, there's a deep, obviously, Hispanic heritage here in Arizona, and people who have immigrated from Mexico or Central America and did it the right way. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Well, I went through, or my family went through the challenge of doing this legally, or went through, a process to become legal. Why should these people just get to skip the line?
Yeah, but also you have generational growth in the Hispanic community. You have Hispanics who have settled in generationally, forming their own businesses, expanding their families, and it's a whole that generational growth, first, second, third, now fourth generation,
Yeah.
is looking at things in a different mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Completely. And that's leading to people question, what is conservatism? What am I? Am I a Democrat? My dad was a Democrat, but am I? And you're seeing that, I think if Juan is successful and Tanya's successful and other conservatives are successful across the country, which it seems like this would be the year for that, especially minority women and African American men who are running across the country, who are identified as conservative, it's going to be really eye opening.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really great.
Well, you have John James up in Michigan. He came very close in a Senate race last cycle. He's running for a congressional district in Michigan. It's going to be it'll be the most diverse Republican freshman class, I think, ever.
Which is tremendous.
Although last time, in the 2020, we had a whole bunch of women that got elected in the Republican conference. One of them was Nancy Mace, who just won her primary in South Carolina.
Yep.
Over a Trump endorsed, and the attacks that Trump has placed on her have been outrageous. So it's interesting to watch how this all plays out because, obviously our primary is coming up. Early ballots go out in a couple weeks. And there's a lot of people who are still undecided on these big races.
Yeah.
And so I think, it's going to be interesting. Here's one thing that I find fascinating is that you have 2020 election, you have all these election deniers, you have people say, oh, this is outrageous. We need to get away from mail-in voting. Voting should only happen on election day with paper ballots and be hand counted, which is impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the number of items on a ballot, all these judges and all that kind of thing.
Which nobody really knows who they're voting for when they
Right.
vote for judges,
Right.
unfortunately.
So it will be fascinating because I know there are people out there who hate mail-in voting. They'll tell you that, we should never do it. And they're on the permanent voter or early voter list. So they're going to get a ballot in
Sure.
a couple weeks. What are they going to do?
They're going to
I
drop
think
it off.
They're going to
themselves?
hold it
Yeah.
and walk it into the polls
Sure.
on election day. They're not going to mail it.
No, they're not going to mail it.
So we're going to have again, and so what will happen because ballots that are early, that are then taken in on election day, have to be signature verified. So
And things take
if,
longer.
If it's close elections, we're going to be waiting days and maybe weeks.
Yeah.
And that's just, that's kind of a function of our own.
Well, and that's
Really?
why turnout is important. Getting your ballot in is important. And but I think there's some safeguards that we've enacted here in the great state of Arizona that are good ones in terms of election integrity. One of them being no ballot harvesting.
Right.
I mean, there's still questions over, how long it took to count the election between Kirsten Sinema and Martha McSally, and what ballot harvesting went on. Probably
Yeah.
negligible, but it was the first sort of look at what is, when people start questioning
Yeah.
what's really happening, and we need to. Those are things that thankfully we're putting a lid on.
Right. And for early votes, the legislature referred a language to the ballot that would require ID for early votes. That is, you put in your last four of your social or your driver's license number.
Which is
And-
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that'll
IDs for voting.
yeah,
Imagine that. Imagine that. Yeah.
Got to use an ID for everything, and it's the idea that it's somehow unfair to people if you require an ID is just it is so demeaning of people.
Yeah.
You
Well,
tell-
it's again putting people in a box and
Yeah.
expecting them to confirm and conform to your narratives.
right.
The
You aren't smart
narratives of the
enough to
left.
do this on your own, so you need us to
Yeah.
protect you.
Yeah, and that is the left demeaning and demoralizing people of African American descent, Hispanic descent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And we've
Appalachian
seen it-
descent.
Yes,
Poor
we've
white people.
And we've seen that time and time again, and that tide is turning. Now we've said on this podcast before, we could screw it all up.
Oh, no
Yeah.
question.
Elections
are-
matter, candidates matter, and we do have several
The
candidates
thing that is
in
constant with Republicans
running that are,
The thing
questionable.
that is constant with Republicans is that we are masters of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yep.
It's a sad commentary, but it's true.
It is.
I don't know. Well,
It is.
hold
Well,
on
I mean,
tight,
thank you
folks,
for
because we're going to be watching. We've got the primary coming up in the heat. It's crazy. I've argued for many, many years we needed to move our primary earlier because it used to be after Labor Day, right?
Yeah.
I didn't mean move it to like the beginning of August
No, I think
to
we
screw
should
up the summer.
join
We need to be in like April.
May. Yeah.
April or May. And I know the legislature hates that because they don't want to do a primary while they're in session and grow up.
Yeah. I think a May primary makes a lot of sense. I mean, just watching how primaries played out this year across the country, especially given the nature of the summers here in Arizona.
Yeah.
I mean, right now it's even hard. If you're a candidate, it's hard to even do a fundraiser because you can't get anybody to show up.
I mean,
It's just everyone leaves, and rightfully so. It's 114 today, probably.
and if you're stuck
and it
here,
might
you
rain.
don't want to go do stuff.
No.
I mean, you just want to hunker down and stay cool.
Well, and
Get in the
and your
pool or-
children are out of school. If you have family, and it's not convenient to
No.
go do anything else. And so, I think a mid-May primary makes a lot of sense for
I like
the
that
state
idea.
of Arizona.
I'm for
Kids
that.
are getting out of school. You're still engaged. You're paying attention. That's the other thing is that really people don't pay attention to politics until really after Labor Day anyway.
Right.
So having a primary in August, are people really? I mean, half of this town is gone.
Well, and if
And
you're
are
here,
they even going to get their ballot?
if you're
they
here,
send away
your brain
from
is fried from
Yeah.
the heat of the last 3 months. So
Yeah.
you're
So-
not thinking straight.
But thanks for recognizing, the great Clarence Thomas,
Yes.
and
Happy birthday.
and for his contributions. The interesting part about the Supreme Court and Clarence Thomas and his tenure is that he's not known to ask a lot of questions.
Right. Although that's changed the last.
That has
couple
changed the
years.
last several years. But for many, many
He
years,
went years
he
without
would
asking a
not
question.
ask a question, but his
in oral arguments.
writings were scathing.
Oh,
and well done.
He's one of the best.
And,
One of the best.
and well thought out, and nobody questions his intellect, even the ones on the other side
Yeah.
who served with him. In fact, I think Sotomayor gave him praises the other day in some kind of deal that she was at, and she got booed, and she said he's the brightest among us.
It's amazing the
So,
division
s-
over this.
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
can't accept people for their intellectual prowess, and whether we agree with them or
Yeah,
disagree.
I
with them.
disagreed with
It's
almost
crazy.
everything that Ruth Bader Ginsburg decided and wrote. But man, she was smart and she was a trailblazer.
Well, and she and Scalia were like
Best
of
buds.
friends,
Yeah.
and respected one another intellectually, and I think that is the key to
Yep.
our republic.
Exactly. Respect.
Respected one another intellectually and enjoyed
They did.
the intellectual jousting
And
on the court,
yeah. I mean,
that's what makes politics fun.
right.
If we
It's
all
not fun
agree on the
anymore.
same thing and we can't discuss
we're
those
just
disagreements in a
Civil
intellectually
way.
sound and civil way, then what's the point?
Yeah. Well,
So we're going to
on
see a
that
lot of
happy note-
intellectual gymnastics over the next couple weeks as
Yeah.
as the SCOTUS sends down a bunch of
Yeah.
opinions.
be watching next week, folks.
Yep.
All righty.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Take care.